The morning bell at Crestview Middle School had already rung when Ezra Carter slipped through the door of room 204, his footsteps quiet but his breathing shallow. The math classroom, bright with fluorescent lights but cold with tension, paused for a moment as heads turned. At the front of the room, Ms. Judith Langston stopped mid-sentence, her chalk still hovering over the board. "Late again, Mr. Carter," she said coolly, her voice slicing through the air with effortless authority. Ezra didn't respond. His eyes were cast downward, his hands clenched tightly around the strap of his weathered backpack. He moved slowly to the edge of the room but didn't head for his seat. "Is there a reason?" Miss Langston continued, her tone growing sharper. "You feel entitled to interrupt my lesson." "Again?" Ezra swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, ma'am. May I stand for today's lesson?" The room, already on edge, fell utterly still. Ms. Langston arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "My back hurts," Ezra said quietly, barely audible. The silence was broken by a few giggles. At one desk, a boy named Trevor gave a loud stage whisper. "Maybe he's tired from carrying all those excuses." Langston smiled, not warmly. "Your back hurts." Her tone turned theatrical. "So we're standing now because sitting is too difficult for you?" Ezra looked down again. "Yes, ma'am." "No," she snapped. "You'll sit, like every other student here." Ezra didn't move. "I can't," he said again softly. Langston's eyes narrowed. She walked around her desk slowly, like a hawk circling prey. "Well then, Mr. Carter, since you're feeling exceptional today, why don't you show us something exceptional?" She erased the basic algebra problem on the whiteboard and began scribbling a new equation. Fast, sharp, almost violent. Symbols sprawled across the board that most students in the room hadn't seen before. Definite integrals, chain rule derivatives, logarithmic transformations. "There," she said, stepping back. "This is a problem I give to my 11th grade calculus class. You say you can't sit down, then you can stand and solve this." The class chuckled uncomfortably. A girl in the back muttered, "Savage." "You have 5 minutes," Langston said, checking her watch, "or it's detention for the rest of the week." Ezra stood frozen, eyes on the board. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the classroom like a drumbeat of judgment. He recognized the problem immediately. It wasn't that he'd seen it before, but it was the kind of problem he'd been teaching himself to solve for nearly a year. While his classmates played video games or watched TikToks, Ezra had spent nights crouched under the glow of a library lamp, flipping through secondhand college textbooks, filling pages with equations no one knew he understood. At home, his small bedroom, shared with his younger brother, was wallpapered in silent ambition. Taped up theorems, post-its of formulas, printouts from forums, and scraps of calculus scrawled on the backs of cereal boxes. He didn't learn like others because no one had ever asked how he learned at all. Ms. Langston didn't know this. She didn't know about the hours Ezra spent at the community center library, or about the quiet, silver-haired professor who had once leaned over Ezra's shoulder and said, "You see in numbers what most people never do." She didn't care about Ezra's bruised ribs or the reason sitting was painful today. She just saw a boy who didn't obey. 1 minute passed, then 2. 3 minutes left, Langston said sharply. Ezra stepped forward. A hush fell over the room as he picked up the marker. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he began, one symbol at a time. His hand moved slowly at first, hesitant, but then faster, with growing confidence. Substitution, integration, limit behavior. His handwriting was precise, his notation clean. By the time the 4th minute ended, he had filled nearly half the board. The smirks were gone now. Even Trevor stared in silence. Langston's expression didn't shift, yet her arms had slowly folded across her chest. The first hint of unease flickered in her eyes. Ezra underlined his final answer, capped the marker, and turned to face the class. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in that cold, tiled classroom, the math had spoken louder than the teacher. For a long moment, there was only silence. Ezra stood near the whiteboard, his hands lightly dusted with marker ink, his breathing calm but guarded. The room remained frozen, 25 students unsure of whether they had just witnessed a miracle or a mistake. Ms. Langston finally stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the tile. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes scanned Ezra's solution line by line. Twice she paused. Once she blinked longer than usual. Then her mouth tightened. "This," she said slowly, "is impossible." Ezra said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt. Langston turned back to him, voice rising. "Where did you get the solution?" "I solved it," Ezra replied quietly. "Did someone show it to you beforehand? Did you copy it from a book? Memorize it from a video?" "No, ma'am, I've been learning on my own." She scoffed. "You expect me to believe that a C- student who can barely follow basic algebra in this class just solved an upper-level calculus problem? Out of nowhere?" Ezra's knuckles whitened, but he held his voice steady. "I study on my own time. And I suppose next you'll tell me you're tutoring college students in your spare time." Her sarcasm drew a few nervous chuckles. Ezra glanced at them. Some looked away in guilt. Others just stared. Langston's eyes locked onto the solution again. Her next move came like a storm cloud breaking. With a sudden motion, she grabbed the board eraser and began smearing his work off the board violently, angrily, until every symbol, every elegant curve, every careful number was gone. Then she turned back to him. "Out," she snapped. "Take your things and go to the principal's office, now." "But," I said now, "for cheating, for disrupting my class, and for continuing this charade." Ezra stepped back, stunned. His hands reached for his backpack almost mechanically. As he moved to the door, a quiet voice from the back of the room stopped him. "Miss Langston?" It was Amira, one of the quietest girls in class. What if he did solve it? Langston turned to her like ice turning in the wind. Not another word. Ezra met Amira's eyes briefly. There was something in her expression he hadn't seen in a while. Not pity, recognition. He walked out. Outside the principal's office, the bench was too hard. Ezra sat anyway, backpack in his lap, spine stiff with pain. The secretary glanced at him with vague suspicion. Inside, he could hear Ms. Langston's voice rising through the glass, animated, precise, indignant. "Refuse to sit, defiant behavior, impossible solution." He closed his eyes. This wasn't new, just bigger. When the door opened, Principal Martin Reynolds appeared. He was a tall, gray-templed man with a voice that sounded like worn leather. "Come in, Ezra." Inside the office, Langston sat stiffly in one chair, arms crossed. She didn't look at Ezra as he entered. "Ms. Langston has told me what happened," Reynolds said. "Would you like to explain your side?" Ezra nodded. "I didn't cheat. I solved the problem. I've been studying advanced math on my own for over a year." Langston scoffed audibly. "Next, he'll say he works for NASA." Reynolds held up a hand. "Ezra, why did you refuse to sit down?" Ezra hesitated. Langston was watching him now closely. His back still ached. The marks from last week's punishment hadn't fully healed. But saying that, would anyone believe him? "I hurt my back," he said at last. "From what?" Ezra's eyes dropped. "I, fell." Langston nodded smugly. "Exactly." Principal Reynolds leaned back. "Ezra, you've struggled in this class all year. What's changed?" "I haven't changed," Ezra said simply. "You've just never asked what I know." There was a knock, the door opened, and Miss Alina Brooks entered, holding a folder. Apologies, she said. I heard Ezra was here. Langston frowned. This is a disciplinary matter. Why is the science department involved? Because, Miss Brooks replied, Ezra is one of the brightest mathematical minds I have seen in a decade, and I'm not about to let this be buried. Ezra looked up, hope flickering behind his tired eyes. Langston's face paled slightly. Principal Reynolds slowly turned to her. I think, he said, we'll need more information before any decision is made. By the time morning light seeped through the windows of Crestview Middle School's administrative wing, the air already carried tension. Ezra Carter sat silently in the small conference room next to the principal's office, a single sheet of lined paper in front of him, along with a sharp pencil and a sealed envelope marked Math Evaluation, prepared by Ms. Langston, reviewed by admin. He had slept only 4 hours, not because of fear, but preparation. His mentor, Dr. Samuel Hartley, had spent the previous night reviewing problems with him, not solutions, but methods, concepts, patterns. Dr. Hartley didn't believe in rehearsed success. Understand the why, Ezra, he had said, and the how will follow. Now, Ezra glanced across the table at Principal Martin Reynolds. I want you to know, Reynolds said, this is not a punishment. It's a chance. Ezra nodded. I understand, sir. Ms. Langston, seated stiffly on the opposite side of the room, said nothing. Her eyes held no emotion, only calculation. Reynolds opened the envelope and placed 5 double-sided sheets in front of Ezra. The problems ranged from basic algebra to advanced calculus. You have 2 hours. Show your work clearly. Ezra picked up his pencil and began. The first page felt like walking downhill, linear equations, simple graph interpretations, and some basic geometry. He moved quickly, neatly, no hesitation, no fear. By page 2, the problems grew more elaborate. Algebraic manipulations, polynomials, multivariable systems. Ezra smiled. This was his terrain. The third page introduced trigonometry. He paused only to draw a unit circle diagram, his pencil strokes graceful and certain. By the time he reached page 4, he had forgotten where he was. Differentiation, integration, chain rules, limits. This was where others had tried to draw a line in front of him. He erased it. On problem 17, a particularly intricate integral involving substitution and logarithmic properties, Ezra stopped, not because he didn't know what to do, but because he realized something. He was enjoying it. Outside the room, Ms. Brooks waited with quiet anticipation. She paced the hallway once, then returned to her chair beside the front desk. Several teachers passed and offered curious glances, but none asked questions. Not yet. Inside, Langston sat motionless, watching. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken a word since the test began. When Ezra turned to the final page, he knew Miss Langston had written it to break him. A dense, multi-step differential equation with no guiding diagram, no context, just numbers, letters, and the weight of disbelief. Ezra rolled his shoulders back, flexed his pencil once, and began writing. The room disappeared. All that remained were the numbers. At the 85-minute mark, Ezra lowered his pencil and exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. I'm finished, he said softly. Principal Reynolds looked up. Would you like to check your work? You have time. Ezra shook his head. I've already checked it, twice. He slid the papers across the table. Langston reached for them, but Reynolds intervened. I'll make copies for independent review, he said firmly. Langston leaned back, lips pressed tight. As Ezra stood to leave, Reynolds looked at him, not with skepticism this time, but something closer to respect. Thank you, Ezra. Ezra nodded, then glanced at Langston. She didn't meet his gaze. He stepped into the hallway and found Ms. Brooks waiting. How do you feel? She asked. I did my best, he said simply, And I think I did more than they expected. She smiled. You always do. By lunch, the school buzzed. Someone in the front office had leaked word that Ezra had then finished the test in less than half of the time and asked for extra paper to show more than one method. In the cafeteria, students who had barely acknowledged Ezra before now whispered his name. Some looked at him with awe, others with confused. A few, like Trevor, didn't seem to know how to look at him at all. But Ezra didn't crave their attention. He just wanted the truth to be seen. That afternoon, Ms. Langston and Ms. Brooks were called into Principal Reynolds' office to review the test results. They sat silently, each with a copy of Ezra's work. After 15 minutes, Ms. Brooks set her papers down, a quiet satisfaction behind her expression. This is extraordinary, she said. Not only are the answers correct, but the reasoning is clean, multi-approach, and elegant. Principal Reynolds turned to Langston. Well? Langston didn't look up. The work is correct. Any signs of cheating? No. Reynolds leaned back. Then I believe we owe this young man more than an apology. We owe him a future. Langston said nothing. But deep inside, a crack began to form in the wall she had built between herself and the students she never truly saw. Ezra Carter had passed the test. But more than that, he had rewritten the terms of it entirely. By the following morning, Ezra Carter's name was no longer whispered in the halls of Crestview Middle School. It was spoken outright. In the cafeteria lines, students craned their necks just to glimpse him. In math class, a boy named Marcus, who hadn't spoken to Ezra all year, moved his tray just enough to make room. Hey, that problem yesterday? He mumbled. Was it like actual college math? Ezra just nodded. He didn't need to explain anymore. The numbers had done it for him. At 11 o'clock a.m., the front office received a visitor. He didn't look like a parent, no anxious energy, no clipboard. Instead, he moved with a quiet confidence, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, soft briefcase in hand. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed, and his glasses glinted beneath the overhead lights. The receptionist looked up. May I help you? Yes, he said warmly. Dr. Samuel Hartley, I'm here for Principal Reynolds. Within minutes, the principal's office door opened to receive him. Reynolds stood from his desk, extending a hand. Dr. Hartley, thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, the professor replied. It concerns Ezra. That's all the notice I needed. Reynolds gestured for him to sit. Ms. Brooks was already there, seated with the test results neatly arranged on the table. Langston, however, was absent. I assume you've heard what happened, Reynolds began. I've heard pieces, Hartley said, opening his briefcase. And Ezra filled in the rest last night. Ms. Brooks smiled faintly. He speaks highly of you. That's mutual, Hartley replied. Reynolds passed a copy of the exam across the desk. This is what he completed yesterday in under 90 minutes. Dr. Hartley scanned the pages quickly but thoroughly. Occasionally, he paused, tilting his head, nodding. On the final page, his eyebrows rose. Oh, this is good, he murmured. This integral on problem 17? He used Laplace substitution instead of the standard method. Is that unusual? Reynolds asked. For a college sophomore? Yes, for a 13-year-old. Hartley chuckled. It's brilliant. Ms. Brooks leaned forward. He wasn't just solving problems. He was thinking like a mathematician. Principal Reynolds cleared his throat. We'd like your help, not just in supporting Ezra, but in helping this school learn from what happened, because something went very wrong here. That afternoon, a faculty meeting was called, mandatory attendance. Teachers filtered into the staff lounge, murmuring, some unaware of the exact reason they had been summoned. Langston arrived last, taking a seat in the corner. Principal Reynolds stood at the front, composed but unsmiling. Today's meeting is not about policy updates, he began. It's about reflection. He paused, letting the silence settle. We recently administered a supervised academic test to one of our 8th grade students, Ezra Carter, following an incident in which his abilities were publicly questioned. Reynolds gestured toward Dr. Hartley, who stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Samuel Hartley," he said, professor of mathematics at Northridge University. "I've been mentoring Ezra for the past 6 months." The room stilled. "I met him at a community tutoring program," Hartley continued. "He was quietly working on calculus problems that most freshmen struggle with. I didn't need a credential to see what he was. Gifted, self-taught, precise. Some teachers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one here saw that," Hartley said gently, "because no one thought to look." His eyes landed briefly on Ms. Langston, who stiffened. "What happened to Ezra wasn't just an academic oversight," Reynolds added. "It was a failure of perspective. A child showed promise, and instead of lifting him, we punished him for being different." Langston finally spoke, her voice brittle. "He defied instruction." "He stood up," Ms. Brooks corrected, "because he was in pain." Langston opened her mouth, then closed it again. Dr. Hartley stepped forward once more. "This isn't about blame. It's about opportunity. Ezra Carter's not the only student hiding brilliance behind silence. The question is, will we keep overlooking them?" A hush fell over the room. For the first time in a long while, Langston's face showed something rare: uncertainty. After the meeting, Principal Reynolds approached Ezra, who sat in the library reviewing a differential textbook. "Ezra," Reynolds said, sitting beside him, "we're revising your academic plan." Ezra looked up, surprised. "You'll be taking math with the high school AP students. Dr. Hartley agreed to oversee your curriculum directly." Ezra blinked. "Really?" Reynolds smiled. "You've earned it." Ezra exhaled softly. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. "Also," the principal added, "there's going to be a school-wide assembly next week. We'd like you to speak, just a few words, about what it means to be underestimated." Ezra hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up?" "You won't," Reynolds said, "and even if you do, you already solved the part they thought you couldn't." Ezra smiled, small but sure. For the first time, the story wasn't about what they expected of him. It was about what he had always been capable of. The gymnasium had never been this full before. Students poured into bleachers, whispering in pockets of curiosity and rumor. Teachers stood along the walls, arms crossed, unsure of what to expect. At the front, beneath the school's crest and two dangling speakers, a modest podium stood waiting. Ezra Carter sat in the front row beside Ms. Brooks and Dr. Hartley, the program folded tightly in his lap. He had worn his best button-up shirt, slightly too big at the shoulders, and combed his hair back with the gel his mother kept for special occasions. Principal Reynolds stepped up first. He greeted the school with practiced calm, offered a few words about growth, accountability, and the importance of recognizing brilliance in unexpected places. Then, his voice dropped in tone, more personal. "Today, we're not just highlighting achievement. We're making something right," he said. "Sometimes when someone shows us something incredible, our first instinct is disbelief. But today, we're learning to listen better, to look closer." He turned to the front row. "Ezra, would you come up?" For a second, Ezra didn't move. Then slowly he rose, legs stiff, palms damp. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as he walked to the microphone. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, some curious, some doubtful. But he remembered Dr. Hartley's words the night before. "You're not speaking to impress them. You're speaking to remind them who you already are." He exhaled. "Hi," Ezra began. His voice wavered, then steadied. "Most of you don't know me. Some of you think you do." Soft laughter rippled. "I've spent a long time trying not to be seen. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I thought it didn't matter if I said it. That changed last week, when I solved a problem that was meant to humiliate me." Now the room was completely still. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because I love math, because it makes sense when people don't. He paused, letting the silence breathe. I study every night. I work problems by flashlight so my little brother can sleep. I learned calculus because it felt like a puzzle I was meant to solve. But none of that showed up on the school record. No one asked. They just saw a quiet kid who was late sometimes, who didn't sit fast enough. He glanced at Ms. Langston in the audience. Her face was unreadable. We tell students to raise their hands, speak up, and ask for help. But what do we do when they try and we don't believe them? A long pause. What happened to me hurt, but maybe it had to happen because now we're here, talking, listening. Ezra looked out over the crowd at the eighth grader in a hoodie looking up in awe, at the teacher who once gave him a warning for reading a math book during lunch. To every student who thinks they have to hide how smart they are, I see you, don't stop. Even if no one claps, even if no one asks. He glanced at the principal, then back at the crowd. Sometimes silence protects us, but sometimes silence erases us. I'm done being erased. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added softly, and I still love math. The gym stayed quiet for one breath, then two. Then it erupted. First a ripple of applause, then a wave. Some students stood. Ms. Brooks wiped a tear. Even Principal Reynolds blinked a little too fast. Ezra didn't smile broadly. He just stepped down, lighter than before. The podium had held his voice, and now everyone had heard. Moral of the story: there are students in every classroom whose light goes unseen, not because they lack brilliance, but because others stop looking too soon. Ezra Carter's story reminds us that gifts come in many forms, some loud, some quiet, some hidden beneath pain. But when we judge a child only by their defiance or their silence, we risk crushing something extraordinary. We must build schools, not just to measure performance, but to recognize potential, to listen deeper, and to restore dignity when it's been denied. Because sometimes the greatest minds sit in the back row, just waiting for someone to ask, "What do you already know?"